Hello, Reddit. This will be long, messy, and painful. This won't be just a post, but a confession. I'm not writing this for sympathy. I don't deserve it, but because the burden has become unbearable. I'm suffocating in the silence of my empty apartment, and the only voices I hear are from the past, judging me. I destroyed everything I loved, and I have no one to talk to about it. Everyone who was dear to me now despises me. And they're absolutely right. This is a story not so much about infidelity, but about the rot that preceded it, and the lifeless desert that followed. My name is Jacob Everett Morgan, but everyone calls me Jake. I'm 30 years old, and I am a ghost of the man I could have been. To understand the depth of the fall, you need to start from the height. And the height was beautiful. I met Sarah Ann Reynolds in our second year at State University, at one of those ridiculous parties in a rented house where the floor is sticky with cheap beer and the music is too loud to talk. She was a friend of my classmate, Lisa. Sarah was standing in a corner of the kitchen, looking at a cat poster hanging on the fridge and smiling at it like an old friend. She wasn't the most striking girl at the party, not in a tight dress, but in a loose forest green sweater and worn-out jeans. But she had hair the color of dark honey, gathered in a messy bun with strands escaping, and eyes. God, those eyes. Not just green, but like moss by an old stream, with golden flecks around the pupils. She was laughing at something Lisa said, and that laugh, quiet, genuine, coming from deep within, cut through the party noise. I walked over, introduced myself, we started talking. It turned out we both hated parties like this but came so as not to let our friends down. We stood in that kitchen for 3 hours, talking about everything. Vonnegut's books, how weird it was that avocado had become toast, our childhood dreams. She wanted to draw comics. I wanted to create the next big social network. I walked her to her dorm. We didn't kiss. We just stood under a streetlight, and she said, "You know, Jake, it's really easy to be with you." That was the best compliment of my life. 7 years of dating. They weren't perfect. We fought about money when I spent my savings on a new gaming computer while she was saving for a trip to Europe. We argued because I was always late, and she valued punctuality. We even broke up for a month in our third year, after a stupid fight where we said too many hurtful things. But we always found our way back to each other. Because the foundation was solid. Respect, friendship, shared values, and that deep, calm feeling that with this person, you are home. I proposed at Lake Tahoe, at dawn, shivering from cold and nerves. She cried and said, "Yes," before I could even finish the sentence. Our wedding was modest, in her parents' garden in Ohio. Michael David Carter, Mike, was my best man. Mike and I had been friends since 7th grade, when he transferred to our school after his parents' divorce. He was a quiet, lanky kid with a couple of bruises under his eye, from his dad, I later learned. I stood up for him when they teased him about his worn-out jacket. We'd been inseparable ever since. He was my brother in everything but blood. He helped me cheat on algebra tests. We lost our virginity together, not with the same girl, obviously, but the same summer camp. He held my hand when my grandfather died. We went to the same university, shared an apartment with another guy. He was the first person I called when Sarah agreed to be my girlfriend. He hugged me and said, "Hold on to her, bro. You don't find ones like that every day." At the wedding, he gave a toast. He said, "I've known Jake longer than anyone here. And I've seen a lot of his stupid faces. But the one on his face right now, as he looks at Sarah, I'm seeing for the first time. It's the face of a man who's found his harbor. Sarah, you've made my best friend the happiest man on earth. And Jake, if you ever hurt her, I'll be forced to break your legs." Kidding, but not really. Everyone laughed. Sarah raised her glass and said, "Thank you, Mike, for making him the man I fell in love with." In that moment, I felt invincible. I had the love of my life and a brother who always had my back. What could possibly go wrong? The first 3 years of marriage were a time of building. We bought a small house in a Seattle suburb, 2 stories, a backyard, a 2-car garage. Sarah turned a small upstairs room into her studio, a creative chaos of graphics tablets, brushes, and printouts of her work. I set up an office with huge monitors and an ergonomic chair. We got Buddy, a fluffy, clueless golden retriever puppy who chased his tail and chewed my headphones. Mike was a constant guest. We developed rituals. Pizza and football on Sundays, hiking together in the summer, celebrating Thanksgiving at our table where Mike was the official taste tester of her signature pumpkin pie. He was part of our ecosystem. If he didn't show up for a week, Sarah would ask, "How's Mike? Is everything okay?" We were a trio. It seemed like it would always be that way. But a quiet, invisible rust began to eat away at the metal of our marriage. Not a crisis, but a slow cooling. My career in IT consulting took off. I became a senior developer, then a team lead. It meant more money, but also more stress, more travel, more evening calls with the team in India. I'd come home drained, my head full of code and deadlines. Sarah was working just as hard. Her career as a graphic designer was gaining momentum. She won several prestigious awards, and big clients started coming to her. We became two successful professionals living under one roof, but less and less, husband and wife. We ordered takeout because no one had the energy to cook. We watched series in silence, glued to our phones. Sex became rare and somewhat mechanical, a ritual to maintain the status quo, not an explosion of passion. We didn't fight, we just drifted apart, like two continents slowly moving on different tectonic plates. And instead of fighting to come back together, I, selfish and cowardly, started looking for warmth elsewhere. Not physically, not yet, but emotionally. I started flirting with the barista at the coffee shop near the office, having long chats with a cute colleague from another department, catching admiring glances from young interns. It tickled my wounded male ego. It made me feel like I was still in the game. And Sarah seemed not to notice, or didn't want to. She was absorbed in her work, in taking care of the house, in walks with Buddy. She tried to reach out quietly. "Let's go somewhere, just the two of us. Do you need help with that project? You look so tired." But I brushed her off. "No time, honey. Some other time." I didn't see that some other time might never come. And then the thunder struck in Mike's life. He was laid off from his financial analyst position after a company merger. His girlfriend Jessica, whom he'd been with for 4 years, said she couldn't see a future with someone who wasn't ambitious enough, and left him for his former colleague. Mike broke. I'd never seen him like this. He stopped shaving, barely left his apartment, stopped answering messages. When Sarah and I broke into his place on the third day of silence, we found him sitting in a semi-dark living room in front of a TV that was on but muted, surrounded by empty beer cans. There was an emptiness in his eyes that chilled me to the bone. In that moment, Sarah took charge. "Pack your things," she said softly but firmly. "You're moving in with us. For as long as you need." He moved into our guest room. It was a natural decision, and at first, I was all for it. He was my brother. Sarah surrounded him with care like a wounded bird. She cooked his favorite meals, silently placing a plate in front of him when he sat on the porch for hours, smoking and staring into the distance. She made him go for walks with Buddy, the dog, sensing his depression, would nudge his wet nose into his palm and insistently bring him a ball. I tried to have manly talks with him, talk about work, the future, but he'd wave me off. "Not now, Jake." And one night, when I came down for water, I heard a quiet conversation in the kitchen. Sarah was sitting at the table, Mike across from her, his head in his hands. She was saying something very softly, almost a whisper. "This doesn't define you, Mike. You are not your job. You are not a relationship. You are you, and you are one of the kindest, most reliable people I know." He didn't answer, but his shoulders stopped shaking. I saw his hand reach across the table and squeeze her fingers for a second. "Thanks, Sar," he whispered. I stepped back into the shadows, feeling a strange pang, of what? Not jealousy, more like shame, because it was her, my wife, saying the words I should have been saying. And doing it with a tenderness I seemed to have forgotten. During those months Mike lived with us, the dynamic slowly, imperceptibly shifted. I buried myself deeper in work, using it as an excuse for my absence, both physical and emotional. I became an outside observer in my own home. Sarah and Mike stayed up in the evenings, talking, watching old movies, while I stayed late at the office or, more often, went drinking with colleagues after work, so as not to return to that atmosphere of quiet, healing closeness from which I had cut myself off. It was during this period that the first incident happened. It couldn't be called cheating, but it was a breach below the waterline, through which water slowly began to seep in. The New York project was a nightmare. The client changed requirements daily, the team was on the verge of mutiny, my boss was pressuring me. One evening, after a particularly humiliating conference call, I went to Harry's bar with a couple of colleagues. Qley was there, A new marketing intern, 22, sunny red-haired, with a shameless laugh and a habit of touching the listener's arm when telling a story. She admired me, said she'd read my articles on the internal portal, that I was a data architecture genius. In my state, tired, professionally inadequate, and lonely at home, her admiration was a drug. We drank a lot. The jokes became more and more ambiguous. I caught her gaze, full of open interest, and it made me feel alive, significant, desired, all the things I hadn't felt at home for months. When the bar closed, I, as the senior and responsible one, offered to give everyone a ride. Qley was last. In the car, she suddenly grew quiet. "Sorry, I think I overdid it," she said, putting her head back against the headrest. "I'm dizzy. Can we just sit for a minute?" I pulled over at a scenic overlook with a view of the night city. We sat in silence. Then she turned to me. "You know, you're not like other managers. You're real." And she kissed me. It was a gentle, drunken, salty, from tears? Hers? Mine? Kiss. I kissed her back. For a few seconds, the world narrowed to the dark car interior, the smell of her perfume, and the feeling that I wasn't a 30-year-old married man with a mortgage and problems, but a 20-year-old guy again, for whom anything was possible. And then, in my head, like an alarm bell, Sarah. Home, buddy, Mike, betrayal. I pulled away so sharply I hit my head on the side window. "No, we can't. I'm married." Qley looked at me with hurt and embarrassment. "Oh, God, I thought you were divorced or something. Everyone says you never wear a ring at work." I looked at my left hand. The ring. I'd taken it off a month ago when my fingers swelled slightly after the gym, and I never put it back on. Not because I wanted to seem single. Just forgot, or didn't want to remember. "I need to take you home," I said hoarsely. She was silent the whole way. At her building, she jumped out without saying goodbye. I sat in the car for another hour, trying to pull myself together. Physically, nothing happened, just a kiss, but in my mind, I had already cheated. I had allowed it to happen. More than that, I had created the conditions for it, by taking off the ring, encouraging the flirtation, seeking solace elsewhere. I was guilty. And what did I do? Confess to Sarah? No, I was scared. Scared of her eyes, of the light going out in them. Scared of destroying that perfect facade of the happy young couple we worked so hard to maintain for others and for ourselves. Instead, I did the worst possible thing. I buried the guilt deep inside and started acting it out on her. I became irritable, nitpicky. "Why do you always make that pasta? I'm sick of it. You could put on some makeup sometimes when we go out." I was looking for flaws in her to justify my inner turmoil. It was pure cowardice. And Sarah, with her innate dignity, first tried to talk, then withdrew into silent defense. The house became a Cold War battlefield, with unspoken grievances and icy stares as the soldiers. Meanwhile, Mike, under her quiet, persistent influence, began to come back to life. He started seeing a therapist, running in the mornings, sending out resumes. And in this strange triangular dynamic, he became an unwitting bridge between us, and then, a living reproach. He tried to shake me up. "Hey, what's up with you, bro? You and Sarah are like strangers. Talk to her." And I'd snap. "Stay out of it. You got enough problems of your own." I saw how he looked at Sarah when she was tired, washing dishes, while I sat in the living room with my laptop. In his gaze was tenderness and something else, something protective. Back then, I chalked it up to gratitude. He was grateful to her. That's all. After 4 months, Mike found a job. Worse than before, with a smaller salary, but stable. He decided to move out. Sarah insisted he stay another couple of weeks until he found a good apartment and was fully back on his feet. I agreed, but something inside me twinged. I became uncomfortable with this coordinated pair of theirs, with how they planned his move together, laughed at inside jokes I was no longer privy to. My withdrawal had reached a point where their closeness, even if platonic, began to irritate me. I felt like a third wheel in my own house. And then came the company holiday party. The anniversary gala, a black tie event at a luxury hotel downtown. Sarah had been complaining of a migraine since morning. She got them from stress. But I, gripped by some irrational, self-destructive urge, demanded she go. "I need you there. You're my wife. Everyone will have their families." I was shouting. It wasn't a request, it was an ultimatum. I wanted her presence to sanctify me publicly, for her to play the role of the happy wife and thereby wash away my past sin with Qley. I wanted proof that everything was still okay. She sat on the edge of the bed, holding her head, looking at me as if seeing me for the first time. "Jake, you've been acting like a complete, selfish asshole lately. I feel sick. I'm not going. Go alone, since these parties of yours are so important." Her words, cold and sharp, cut right through me. I slammed the door and left, full of righteous, so I thought, anger. I blamed her for not supporting me. The irony was as bitter as wormwood. The party was pompous and soulless. Glittering crystal, shimmering silk, fake smiles. I leaned on the whiskey, trying to drown out the mix of guilt, anger, and emptiness. The alcohol didn't make me happy, it made me angry and desperate. I saw couples dancing, holding hands at tables, and my loneliness burned inside. She should be here, I thought with a new wave of resentment. She owed it to me to be here. And then Emily appeared. Emily from marketing. We'd crossed paths at meetings. She was responsible for promoting one of our products. Smart, witty, around 28. Always impeccably dressed, with perfect makeup and a confidence that seemed unshakable. That night, she was in a black dress that clung to her like a second skin. She approached me at the bar as I ordered another whiskey. "Looks like someone decided to drink to the company's success all by themselves," she said, her voice laced with a light, understanding mockery. "The company can drink to itself," I grumbled. She laughed. "Rough day? Rough year," I blurted out, immediately regretting it. We started talking, first about work, then more personal things. She was divorced, no kids, fully dedicated to her career. Said she didn't believe in fairy tales about happy marriages. People change, or just show their true colors, she said, sipping her martini. Her cynicism resonated with my state. With her, I didn't have to pretend to be happy. I could be irritable, tired of the world. She understood, or pretended to. We danced, pressed close together on the crowded dance floor to a slow song. Her perfume was thick, spicy, nothing like Sarah's light floral scent. Her body was different, more athletic, tense. It was novelty. It was forbidden. And it was exciting. Alcohol and adrenaline clouded the last remnants of reason. I wasn't thinking about Sarah. I was only thinking about numbing the pain, about feeling desired, about proving to myself that I still meant something. We went out to the balcony for air. The night was cold, and she shivered. I, like a gentleman, what a joke, draped my jacket over her shoulders. She turned to me. Her eyes glittered in the lantern light. "Thanks, Jake," she whispered. And in that whisper was a promise. I leaned in and kissed her. And this time, I didn't pull away. This time, I sank into that kiss with the desperation of a drowning man clutching at a straw. There was no love in it. Not even real passion. There was escape. Escape from myself, from my marriage, from my home where, I thought, I was no longer welcome. "Let's get out of here," she said, barely pulling away. And I, without a word, nodded. We took a taxi. I don't even remember naming the motel address. Some slasher inn, on the outskirts of town, cheap, anonymous, hourly. The room smelled of cigarettes and disinfectant. Everything happened in a haze. There was a vulgar, rough intimacy, more like mutual use than closeness. And in the midst of it, in the midst of that foreign body and foreign sounds, a clear, chilling image flashed in my drunk brain, Sarah's face. Not angry, not crying. But as I had seen it that morning, tired, pale, with shadows of pain around her eyes. And in that moment, all pleasure turned to ash. I was seized by panic, shame, and physical revulsion. I pulled away, grabbing my head. "What's wrong?" Emily asked with annoyance. I can't. I need to go." She laughed, a sharp, unpleasant sound. "Oh, God. Classic. Guilty conscience afterwards? Cute. So you're not such a bad boy after all?" I dressed, my hands shaking. I didn't look at her. I threw some bills on the table, for the room, even though it was already paid. "I'm sorry," I mumbled into space. "Yeah, fuck you, Jake," she said calmly, lighting a cigarette. "Next time you decide to play the bad boy, be ready to play until the end." I ran out into the cold night air. I threw up in the bushes by the parking lot. My body shook from cold and shock. I called a taxi and went home. On the way, I tried to come up with an alibi, an excuse, anything. But my mind was empty. There was only animal terror in the understanding, it's over. I had just set fire to the bridge I was standing on. "Where were you?" Sarah asked. Her voice was quiet, even without a single emotional note. That was worse than screaming. My tongue stuck to the roof of my mouth. At the party, then we went with colleagues to a bar. The garage, it ran late. Don't lie, Jake, Mike said. His voice was low, hoarse, as if run through sandpaper. He wasn't shouting. He was just stating a fact, and it sent chills down my spine. I saw you. The world slowed down. Sounds grew distant. What? I managed to squeeze out. I was at the garage with Tom and Lewis, Mike said slowly, enunciating every word. We were celebrating me finding an apartment. I saw you on the second-floor balcony. You were kissing some brunette in a black dress. I thought I was hallucinating. I went up to make sure. But you were already leaving. Together, with your arms around each other. I tried to call. You didn't pick up. I came here, told Sarah. Each of his words hit like a hammer driving a nail, pinning me to the floor. I stood, unable to move, in my rumpled tuxedo, still reeking of another woman's perfume, alcohol, and betrayal. Sarah slowly rose. She walked right up to me. Her eyes, those moss-green eyes I once drowned in, were now like glass, cold, impenetrable. Who is she? Emily? I whispered. A colleague. From marketing. She nodded, as if receiving a weather report. And what happened next? Did you go for coffee? Discuss marketing strategy? Her voice held a poisonous, icy mockery for the first time. I was silent. My silence was an answer louder than any words. She recoiled from me as if from something contagious. Pack your things. And get out. Right now. Sarah, please, it was a terrible mistake. I was drunk, I wasn't thinking. Weren't thinking? That was Mike roaring, jumping up from the sofa. Buddy flinched back. You weren't thinking? About your wife? About your home? About the fact that your best friend, whom you took in, might see you? Or did you think I'd cover for you, like always? Cover your ass, Jake? Mike, don't. Sarah began, but her voice broke. No, Sar, I have to. He came up to me, his face inches from mine. I lived here. I saw you both suffering. I saw you pulling away from her. And you know what? I felt like shit because part of me was glad. Glad you were such an idiot, ruining it all yourself. But even in my dirtiest fantasies, I never imagined such treachery. Right under my nose, while she was here, with a migraine, alone. You're in love with her. The words slipped from my lips quietly, but they rang in the quiet room like a gunshot. Mike froze. His rage gave way momentarily to shock, then to something like shame. He looked at Sarah. She was looking at him with wide eyes, complete incomprehension in them. What? She breathed out. Mike closed his eyes for a second. When he opened them, there was only infinite weariness and bitterness. Yes, I'm in love with you, Sarah. For years, but that doesn't matter right now. He turned back to me. And you don't get to use that as an excuse. No feeling of mine would have made me do what you did. Because I respected her, and I, paradoxically, respected you. Until today. Sarah looked utterly lost. Her world was crumbling from all sides at once. Her husband's betrayal and her best friend's confession. Just go, Jake, she said, and the dead emptiness was back in her voice. Before I call the police. I don't want you near me. Not now. Maybe not ever. I looked at Mike, searching for any support, any glimmer of the old friendship. But his gaze was cold and relentless as stone. He turned away from me and went to stand beside Sarah, not touching her, just standing there, like a guard. That was the end. In that quiet living room, in the pre-dawn twilight, under the lamplight, everything died. My marriage, my friendship, my idea of myself as a good man. I went upstairs to the bedroom. Our bedroom. The scent of her shampoo still lingered in the air. On the nightstand, our wedding photo in a silver frame still stood. We were laughing, tangled in the cake-cutting ribbon. I looked away. I grabbed a duffel bag and threw in random things from the closet. T-shirts, socks, jeans. I didn't take anything that reminded me of none of the sweaters she gave me, no matching pajamas. I was a looter, robbing the ruins of my own life. When I came back down, they were still standing in the living room. I walked past without looking. At the door, I turned. Buddy, I started. Take your bag and go, Sarah interrupted. I'll take care of Buddy. He stays with me. We'll sort everything else out through lawyers. I left. The door closed behind my back with a quiet but final click. I got into my car, put my head on the steering wheel, and couldn't cry. There was only a huge, all-consuming void inside me. I started the engine and drove off into the gray, indifferent pre-dawn gloom, not knowing where I was going. The end of one life. The beginning of purgatory. The divorce was finalized 6 months later. I signed all the papers without contesting. The house, the majority of the savings, even a portion of my future bonuses, it all went to Sarah. The official reason was irreconcilable differences, but everyone knew the truth. The court hearing was brief and emotionless. We sat in the same room, separated by an aisle and our lawyers. I stole glances at her. She was dressed in a severe dark blue suit, her hair in a tight bun. She looked composed, fragile yet unshakable. She never once looked in my direction. When the judge banged the gavel, I felt not pain, but a strange emptiness, as if a diseased organ had finally been removed, leaving an empty, aching cavity. I moved into a small rental apartment in a neighborhood that was neither bad nor good, just nondescript. 2 rooms, a view of the neighboring building's wall, the smell of old carpet. I bought the bare minimum of furniture. A bed, a sofa, a table. It wasn't a life, it was an existence in standby mode. I went to work, performed tasks on autopilot, came home, watched something mindless on the screen, tried to sleep. The circle was closed. I was alone, and I could only blame myself. Therapy, which I started at the urging of my weary lawyer, you need to show you're working on yourself. It might soften some financial demands, turned out to be the only ray of light in this gloom. My therapist, Dr. Alina, a woman in her 60s with a penetrating but non-judgmental gaze, made me dig deeper than just, I made a mistake. Let's put the guilt aside for a second, Jake, she'd say calmly. It's there, it's huge, and we'll come back to it. But let's first look at what brought you to the edge of the cliff. What was happening inside you that year before the affair? And I began to talk. About fear. Fear of mediocrity, fear of becoming a boring husband, fear that our love was just a habit. About my father, who had silently endured a job he hated all his life, and my secret terror of repeating his path. About how career success became my only measure of self-worth, and when I reached a certain level, there was emptiness inside. About how I didn't know how to ask for help, how to talk about my weaknesses, especially with Sarah, because I wanted to be her rock, her ideal. And when the rock cracked, I decided not to show it, but to hide it, covering it with the tinsel of other women's attention. You felt unfulfilled, unacknowledged, and undesirable? Dr. Alina clarified. And instead of seeking confirmation of your worth in your relationship with your wife, in dialogue, you went looking for it externally, from those who only saw your successful outer shell. That's a classic escape, not to someone, but from something. From yourself, first and foremost. It was painful to hear, but it was the truth. I didn't cheat because I stopped loving Sarah. I cheated because I stopped loving and respecting myself, and decided that someone else's adoration would be the cure. But it was poison. We also talked about my friendship with Mike. How I subconsciously saw him as part of my property, as a brother who would always be on my side by default. How I used his presence in the house as a kind of stabilizer, without thinking about his feelings, his mental state after his own collapse. I was so absorbed in my own narcissistic crisis that I became blind to the pain of the 2 closest people. Your betrayal was multi-layered, Dr. Alina summarized one day. You betrayed your wife's trust. You betrayed the code of friendship. But the first and most important contract you broke was the one with yourself, about honesty. You lied to yourself about being happy. You lied to yourself about being able to handle the situation. You lied to yourself that there would be no consequences. Therapy didn't remove the guilt. It made it conscious, structured. And sometimes that only made it heavier. Now I saw the whole chain, every weak link. And I knew I was the blacksmith who forged those links. About 8 months after the divorce, I got indirect news. Through LinkedIn, we were still connected there. Probably out of forgetfulness, I saw an update to Sarah's profile. She had changed jobs, moved to a well-known design studio in Portland, Oregon, thousands of miles from Seattle. My heart sank. She hadn't just left. She had run away from everything that reminded her of us, of our shared past. Maybe from Mike, too? I didn't know. I couldn't help myself and wrote to Mike. The first message after all that time. Short, devoid of hope. Saw Sarah's moving to Portland. Is she okay? And you? The reply came 3 days later. No salutation. She's leaving tomorrow. She needs a fresh start. I'm helping her move. I'm fine. Don't write again. A fresh start. Without me. Maybe with him? The thought burned. But there was no jealousy in it. There was a bitter, aching note of finality. They were in this together, cleaning up the debris I left. There was a terrible sense to it. I didn't write again. I continued my routine life. Work, therapy, empty apartment. I tried to make new acquaintances, even went on a couple of dates set up by a colleague. But it was a failure. I was emotionally disabled. My past stories hovered in the air like an unspoken ghost. I'd look at these women and see not them, but the ghost of Sarah, or the ghost of that empty fun with Emily. I couldn't let anyone in. I was locked in the prison of my own making. One day, coming back from the grocery store, I saw a couple in the park. A man and a woman in their 30s, flying a kite with a little girl. They were laughing, the girl squealing with delight as the kite caught the wind. Such a simple, mundane scene pierced me through. That could have been my life. In a couple of years. Sarah, me, our child. Buddy running around. A picnic on a blanket. But that picture was never meant to materialize. I, with my choice, had erased it from all possible realities. I sat on a bench a distance away and cried. For the first time, really cried. Not from self-pity, but from the realization of the irrevocability of the loss. I wasn't just mourning Sarah or the friendship. I was mourning the person I could have become and the life we could have built. I was mourning a future that died without ever being born. That night, I wrote a long, rambling letter. Not to Sarah or Mike. To myself. To the Jake from the past who stood on that balcony with Emily. I wrote about what he was feeling in that moment. The fleeting high, the cheap thrill, the false sense of freedom. And then I described what awaited him in an hour, a day, a year. The emptiness in the motel. The ice in his wife's voice. The hatred in his best friend's eyes. The empty apartment. The broken relationships with his parents. Therapy. Sleepless nights. The letter spanned 10 pages. I printed it, put it in an envelope, and wrote the date of that fateful night on it. And I hid it in my desk drawer. As a reminder. As a tombstone over my former life. Gradually, very slowly, I began to build something resembling a life. Not a happy one, but a meaningful one. I developed rituals, started cooking dinner for myself, even when I didn't feel like it. Signed up as a volunteer at an animal shelter on Saturdays, cleaning kennels, walking dogs. It was a sort of penance. I couldn't take care of Buddy, but I could take care of other abandoned creatures. Their grateful looks and wagging tails didn't heal, but they gave tiny points of light. I also started exercising more, not for looks, but to exhaust my body and release the adrenaline and aggression directed at myself. Long runs along the waterfront, where the bay wind blew some of the obsessive thoughts out of my head. At work, things slowly improved. The scandal was forgotten, replaced by new gossip. I was given a new project, smaller and more isolated. I threw myself into it headlong, not for my career, but simply to fill time with intellectual activity that left no room for reflection. That's how almost 2 years passed. 2 years of life in the after. I learned to exist with it. The pain became not sharp, but dull, background, like an old fracture that aches when the weather changes. I thought it would continue like this, a quiet, gray atonement. But the universe, as it turned out, had prepared one last, most sophisticated test for me. Not a punishment, but a mirror in which I had to see all the consequences of my actions in the purest, most merciless light. It happened on a Thursday. I had a business trip to Portland. A small tech conference, plus a meeting with a potential contractor. I knew Sarah lived there, but Portland isn't a village. The chances of running into her were negligible. I even checked in advance. Her studio's office was in a different part of the city, far from my hotel and the convention center. I was geared up for a strictly professional trip. The last day of the conference was light. The main presentations were over, and I had a few free hours before my evening flight. I decided to go to a large mall near the airport, to buy a birthday gift for my niece and just kill time. I wandered through endless brightly lit corridors, past fragrant boutiques and noisy food courts, feeling like a stranger in this temple of mindless consumption. And then, walking out of an electronics store with a box in my hand, I saw them. They were about 50 meters away, coming out of a crate and barrel. Mike was carrying 2 large flat boxes, like parts of a dresser or cabinet. Sarah was walking beside him, showing him something eagerly on her phone screen. She was laughing. Time slowed down. The sounds of the mall, the murmur of voices, music, the clatter of carts, receded, turning into a distant, indistinct noise. All my attention narrowed to this couple. She looked different, not like in my memories. Her hair was shorter, shoulder-length, and lighter, as if sun-bleached. She was wearing simple jeans, sneakers, and a loose gray sweater. No makeup, or almost none. And there was a new kind of chic in that. The chic of someone who has nothing to prove. She wasn't radiant like in the early years of our relationship. The radiance had been replaced by another expression, a deep, calm confidence. Serenity. She seemed firmly grounded. Mike had changed too. He looked relaxed. There was none of that perpetual slight tension he used to have, as if he was always braced for a blow from fate. His posture was straight, shoulders back. He looked attentively at the phone, then at her, smiling back. The smile was light, natural. He said something, and she laughed again, nudging him in the shoulder with her free hand. It was a gesture of such simple, homely tenderness that something inside me clenched into a tight, painful knot. They didn't see me. They were absorbed in their little world, their joint project, buying furniture. For their shared home. That thought came on its own and hung in the air with a bitter aftertaste. I froze, pressing myself against a wall behind a promotional stand. A wild animal instinct, not to be seen. I watched as they walked to their car. Not Mike's old Honda, but a new, dark blue Subaru Forester. A practical family car. Mike carefully loaded the boxes into the trunk, then opened the front passenger door for Sarah. And then he did it. Before she got in, he leaned in and kissed her. Not a passionate, consuming kiss of lovers, but a light, confident, almost habitual one. The kiss of a man who knows he has the right to it. Who knows he is home. She touched his cheek with her hand, palm flat, for a moment. A quick, intimate gesture of gratitude, acceptance. Then she got in, and he closed the door. In that moment, something inside me finally collapsed. Not hope. That had been gone for a long time. The last, secret illusion that somewhere in a parallel universe, things could have been different, collapsed. No, they couldn't have, because that universe where I wouldn't have made that mistake didn't exist. I was who I was. And they were who they were. And their world, which I saw, was the logical, healthy, right continuation of the story. He had loved her silently for years, faithfully, guarding her happiness even from himself. And I, having had everything, had carried that treasure like a copper penny and ended up trading it for a handful of sand. They found each other not despite, but as a consequence of my betrayal. My act was the fire that scorched the earth on which something new could grow. And on that scorched earth, they had sprouted. Mike walked around the car, got in the driver's seat, and they drove away. I stood in the same spot for another 10 minutes, just staring into space. My hands were shaking. Inside, there was no pain, no jealousy, but a strange, chilling calm. I saw the end of my story. A period. Not an ellipsis, but a bold, irrevocable period. I walked to the nearest cafe, sat at a table by the window, and ordered a double espresso. My hands were still shaking. I took out my phone and did something I hadn't done in almost 2 years. Logged into Instagram. I had deleted it from all devices after the divorce, but I remembered the login and password. I typed Sarah's name. Her profile was private. The avatar picture was a silhouette against a mountain sunset. Not her, just an abstraction. Nothing to be learned. I typed Mike's name. His profile was open, but he hardly used it. The last photo was from 6 months ago, a shot of a tropical beach. No people, just sea and palms. Caption. Need more of this. No traces of their shared life. They were protecting it. They had walled off their new world from outsiders, and especially from me. That was right, wise, and again, painful in the realization that I was that outsider from whom they needed protection. I drank the bitter coffee, burning my tongue, hoping the physical pain would override the emotional one. It didn't help. I looked at my reflection in the glass. A 32-year-old man in a business suit with empty eyes. A successful IT specialist. A renter. An animal shelter volunteer. Divorced. Former friend. Ghost. I remembered Mike's words in our house when I was picking up my things. Live with it now. I had been living, carrying that burden every day. But only now, seeing them, did I understand the true weight of that load. It wasn't just a burden of guilt. It was a burden of alternate reality. The burden of a life I wasn't living. The burden of laughter I wasn't hearing. Mornings I wasn't seeing. A future I wasn't building. It was the burden of their happiness, in which I had no right to participate. Not even as a friend. Not even as an observer. I paid for the coffee and drove to the airport. On the plane, looking out the window at the receding lights of Portland, I wasn't thinking about what I had lost. I was thinking about what they had found. And in that thought, paradoxically, there was a drop of bitter, bitter peace. If someone was destined to be with her, to give her that feeling of security and quiet happiness I saw in her eyes, then better Mike than anyone else. Better the man who had loved her silently for years than the one who received her love openly and trampled it. There was a kind of twisted justice in that. But for me, there was no justice. No redemption. There was only after. And in that after, I had to keep living. A year after seeing their surname in the article, something happened to me that I completely didn't expect. I met a woman. Not for a date, not for a fling. Her name was Eleanor. We literally collided at the shelter. I was carrying a large box of dog food, turning a corner, and she, walking a nervous pit bull puppy on a leash, miscalculated the trajectory. We collided, the box flew, kibble scattered across the floor, the puppy barked excitedly, and I, trying to keep my balance, almost landed on all fours. Oh my God, I'm so sorry. I wasn't looking where I was going at all. She babbled, trying simultaneously to calm the puppy, pick up the food, and help me up. Eleanor was a new volunteer, a physical therapist by day. She was around 40, with intelligent, somewhat tired gray eyes and streaks of gray in her dark, ponytailed hair. There was a calm, confident efficiency in her movements, even as she picked up food from the floor. We cleaned up the mess together, and she, apologizing, offered to compensate for the damage with a cup of coffee at the cafe across the street. Over that coffee, we started talking. About animals, about work, about why we came here. Her story was different, but somewhat familiar. She had gone through a difficult divorce a few years back, was left with 2 teenage kids, and volunteering was her way out of the work-home kids loop and to do something for others. She didn't pry into my story, and I didn't offer it. There was something incredibly pleasant about just chatting with a smart, ironic person whose eyes weren't looking for sensationalism or cause for judgment in my past. We started crossing paths at the shelter, then began coordinating our shifts. Then we started going on long walks with the most challenging dogs that needed special attention. We talked about books, funny work incidents, the absurdity of life. It was easy with her. There was no tension, no games, no need to be anyone other than myself. The person I had become, a bit withdrawn, slightly cynical, but trying to do good. I didn't feel the all-consuming passion for her that I had felt for Sarah at the beginning. No butterflies, no dizziness. It was something else, a feeling of deep inner peace. As if after a long storm, I had found a quiet, safe harbor. I could be silent with her, and the silence wasn't awkward. I could tell her about something complicated at work, and she'd listen, asking precise, insightful questions. She saw the world as it was, complex, imperfect, full of pain, but also a place for small acts of kindness. Another 6 months of our platonic meetings passed before I invited her to dinner. Not to a restaurant, but to my place. I made pasta, the only dish I could manage decently. She came with a bottle of red wine and a homemade pie her kids had baked. That night, after dinner, we were sitting on my nondescript sofa, and the conversation somehow turned to the past. You never asked why I got divorced, I said, looking at the city lights out the window. Because it's your business, Eleanor replied softly. And because everything I need to know about you, I see now. You're kind to animals. You're patient. You take responsibility for your work. And you have sad eyes that seem to hold some long-standing pain. If and when you want to share it, I'll listen. But not before. Her words moved me deeply. There was an acceptance in them that I hadn't felt since the very beginning with Sarah. But back then, that acceptance was based on an idealized image. Eleanor was accepting me now, with all the scars and the baggage. I cheated on my wife, I blurted out suddenly, not looking at her. My best friend caught me with someone else. He told her, I lost everything. My wife, my friend, my home, respect, everything. I was a coward, a selfish bastard. Silence hung in the room. I was afraid to look at her, afraid to see disgust, disappointment. But she just sighed. Thank you for telling me. That must have been very hard to carry. I looked at her. There was no judgment in her eyes. There was sadness and understanding. Do you still love her? She asked. I shook my head. No, I love the memory of what we had. And I respect the person she became without me. But it's not love, it's regret, and guilt. And him? Your friend? He's her husband now. And probably always should have been. They're happy. And that's right. Eleanor nodded, considering my words. And you? Do you still feel like a bastard? Every day, I admitted honestly. But now I try to be someone who fixes mistakes, not makes new ones. It doesn't redeem the past. But it gives me the right to look at myself in the mirror in the morning. She smiled, and in her smile was such a warm, mature tenderness that my heart clenched. You know, Jake, she said, we all are bastards at some point in our lives. Or cowards. Or selfish. The difference isn't whether you fell. The difference is whether you got up. And where you go after you get up. That evening, we didn't become lovers. We just sat holding hands, looking at the city. It was a new experience for me. Closeness without passion, but with deep trust. It was healing. With Eleanor, everything developed slowly, cautiously, as if we both, with our own scars, were afraid to make a sudden move and cause pain. I met her kids, smart, sarcastic 15-year-old Lauren and quiet, programming-obsessed 13-year-old Eli. They accepted me with wary politeness, which was more than I could have expected. I didn't try to be their father. I was just Mom's friend, who sometimes helped with math or fixed the computer. With Eleanor, I learned to laugh again, not the hysterical, drunken laughter after the affair, but a calm, warm laugh from deep within. She taught me not to be afraid of silence. Taught me that you could be happy not in a perfect, shiny Instagram picture, but in this simple, reliable, here and now. A joint grocery run, watching a series, talking about the day. Once, lying next to her in my bed, I asked, aren't you scared of my past? Of what I'm capable of? She turned to me, placed her palm on my chest, right over my heart. I'm only scared of what you can do now. And now, you're a person I trust. The past is a lesson. Or a life sentence. The choice is yours. And I think you've already made your choice. She was right. I chose life. Not the one I dreamed of. A different one. More modest, quieter, with shadows of the past always trailing behind me, but no longer looming over me like a black cloud. I still sometimes thought about Sarah and Mike. Learned through mutual acquaintances that they were expecting a child. That news evoked a strange mix of feelings in me. A sharp, piercing sadness for the life that could have been mine, and a quiet, sincere wish for their happiness. Now I could wish them well without internal anguish, without self-flagellation. Simply as two people who found each other, despite everything. I didn't become happy in the conventional sense of the word. Too much was broken inside. But I became whole. I learned to live with the truth about myself. I learned to forgive myself, not to forget, but to move forward. I learned to love in a new way, not like a crazy, all-consuming fire, but like a warm, reliable flame in a fireplace that warms a home. One spring day, I was walking in the park with Eleanor and her kids. Bruno, the old Labrador from the shelter I had eventually taken in, the shelter was closing for renovations, and he had nowhere to go, was plodding along beside us, enjoying the sun. Lauren was laughing at something Eli said. Eleanor took my hand, and her fingers intertwined with mine. It was cool but sunny. And in that moment, I understood what I was feeling. It wasn't euphoria. It was a deep, bottomless sense of peace. Acceptance. Of what is. I destroyed one life. But from the wreckage, with endless effort and pain, I built another. It wasn't perfect, but it was real, and it was mine. I glanced at Eleanor, and she, as if sensing my gaze, smiled at me. There was no question in her smile. There was knowledge of what we had both been through, and a quiet joy that we had found each other here, among these ruins. I was no longer a man defined by one terrible act. I was the sum of all my actions, both bad and good. And now, step by step, I was trying to make the scales slowly but surely tip toward the good. That is redemption. Not a one-time forgiveness, but a daily, difficult choice. The choice to be better. The choice not to run away. The choice to love, despite the fear of causing pain again. The choice to live. Bruno died quietly in his sleep on his bed at my feet. It was sad, but not tragic. He lived a long life for a dog his size, and his last years were filled with care. I scattered his ashes in the park where we used to walk. Eleanor was with me, holding my hand. The grief of loss was pure, unburdened by guilt. I was able to say goodbye with dignity. But the biggest changes weren't in my personal life, they were inside me. Therapy with Dr. Alina became less intensive, moving to a maintenance mode, once a month. We worked a lot on separating the feeling of guilt from identity. You are not the bastard who cheated, she would say. You are a man who committed a bastardly act. The difference is huge. The first is a brand for life. The second is an action, followed by consequences and, importantly, work on change. I started keeping a journal. Not daily, but when things got overwhelming. I described not only the bad, but also moments of quiet joy. The taste of coffee Eleanor made, a problem solved at work, the grateful look of a new shelter puppy I was working with. I wrote letters I never sent. To Sarah, to Mike, to my parents. In them, I wasn't asking for forgiveness. I was trying to explain, to understand for myself the scale of the damage I'd caused and how I lived with it. It was a way of having a dialogue with the ghosts of the past, so they would stop being silent accusers. Once, going through old boxes in the attic, I found our wedding album. I don't know how it ended up there. Sarah must have sent it with the rest of my things without looking. I sat on the floor and opened it. There we were, Sarah and I, young, radiant, full of hope. Our parents, friends, Mike, laughing, glass in hand. I waited for the pain, the longing, the self-loathing to wash over me. But something else came. A light, almost weightless sadness. Like for someone who died long ago of natural causes. Those people in the photos, they are me and her, but we've become different people. Lived different lives. I closed the album, wrapped it in paper, and put it back in the box. I didn't throw it away. Just set it aside, like a historical artifact. Evidence that that life existed. It wasn't false. It just ended. My mom, after several years of strained relations, started calling just to chat again. Asked about work, about Eleanor, whom she'd met once and, to my surprise, approved of, about my health. My dad still kept his distance, but on my birthday, he sent a short text, "Happy birthday, son." For him, that was a lot. I learned to appreciate these small steps. But the most unexpected was a call from Tom, our mutual friend with Mike. We hadn't spoken since that day he called me after the scandal. "Jake, hi, it's Tom. Don't hang up, please." His voice sounded uncertain. I was sitting in my office at work, and the world swayed for a second. "Hi, Tom. What's up?" Nothing bad. Just, I was sitting here thinking. We all just kind of recoiled back then, 5 years ago. Mike was furious, Sarah was in shock, you disappeared. And we all, the whole gang, just took the side that was easier to take. The victim's side, and the friend who was defending that victim. I was silent, not knowing what to say. "I'm not justifying you," Tom added quickly. "You fucked up, big time. But, I haven't been sinless in my life either. Not as public, but..." And I thought, it's been ages. And that maybe you're still out there. And maybe we could, I don't know, have a coffee. Like old acquaintances. No deep analysis. We met at a neutral cafe downtown. It was awkward for the first 10 minutes. Then we started talking about football, old college stupidities, work. Tom mentioned Mike and Sarah in passing, saying they were doing well, had a daughter, moved to the suburbs, bought a house. I nodded, feeling not pain, but an echo of that same light sadness. I was happy for them. Sincerely. "They don't mention you," Tom said carefully. "It's like a closed topic. But, you know, a couple of months ago I was at their place for their little girl's birthday. Mike, after a few drinks, told me that if it weren't for all that, he'd never have been with Sarah. And he said it without anger. Just as a fact, a strange twist of fate. That touched a nerve, not as hope for forgiveness, but as an acknowledgement of that complex, ugly, but real connection that forever bound the three of us. We were part of each other's stories, even if not the chapter any of us would have wanted to be. Don't tell them anything, I said to Tom as we parted. Just, if you get the chance, just be a good friend to them. They deserve that, Tom nodded. And you, take care of yourself, Jake. Glad you're okay. That conversation became another stone in the bridge I was slowly, stone by stone, building back to humanity. Not to that old life, but to the ability to look at the past without shame that makes you shut your eyes. With Eleanor, we talked about the future one evening. About what would happen when her kids went off to college. "Do you ever want to get married again?" she asked. Looking at the fire in the fireplace, I'd finally bought a bigger apartment with a fireplace. I thought about it. I don't know. Marriage for me, it's associated with a promise I once smashed so hard it echoed for miles. I'm scared to make promises like that. "Who's talking about promises?" she smiled. "Maybe just partnership. About being there. In sickness and in health, as they say. Just without the pomp. Without expecting perfection. And you?" I asked. I believe in real actions more than in vows. You've been proving with your actions for 5 years what kind of man you are. To me, that carries more weight than any vow at an altar. We didn't get engaged, but that evening I realized that if I ever decided to do it again, it would only be with her. Because with her, I could be myself, broken but mending, guilty but accountable. She saw the entire map of my soul, with all its dark forests and scorched fields, and still chose to walk it with me. Last summer, I went on a solo hiking trip in the Cascade Mountains. I'd always loved the mountains, but after the divorce, I stopped going. Too many memories of hikes with Sarah and Mike. But now I wanted to. Not to overcome, but just to be alone with nature, with myself. On the third day, at an altitude of about 2,000 meters, I came out on a rocky ledge with a view of the valley. It was windy and piercingly quiet. I sat, drinking tea from a thermos, watching the clouds drift below me. And there, on the summit, in complete solitude, it finally happened. The thing I'd been waiting for all these years but had stopped hoping for. Forgiveness came, not from Sarah or Mike, not from God or the universe, from myself, the very thing Dr. Alina had talked about. It didn't come as a bright flash of insight, but as a quiet, deep understanding, diffused in the air. The understanding that the guy who cheated on his wife, that's me. But that's not all of me. It was a version of me, lost, frightened, weak. I can't tear that page out of the book of my life. But I can acknowledge that it's there. And I can acknowledge that the next chapters, the ones where I cared for Bruno, where I took on that difficult project, where I'm sitting here on this summit, where I love Eleanor and her kids, where I help at the shelter, they were also written by me. And they carry no less weight. I am not a good man who made one bad mistake. And I am not a bad man who sometimes does good deeds. I am a complex, contradictory person, capable of both treachery and mercy. And I choose where to direct my strength now. I cried. For the first time, not from despair or self-pity, but from relief. The tears were salty and cold from the wind. I cried for everything. For the pain I caused, for the love I lost, for the friendship I betrayed, for the long years of atonement, for the quiet happiness I found later. I cried as one cries at a grave, with sadness, but also with the acknowledgement that life goes on. When the tears stopped, I felt an incredible lightness. Not as if the burden had disappeared. As if I had finally straightened up under its weight and learned to carry it without bending. I came down from the mountain the next day. Returned to the city, to Eleanor, to work, to life. But something had changed, permanently. I no longer looked over my shoulder, expecting to see ghosts. They were with me, in my memory, but they no longer had power over me. The story I started telling here on Reddit is coming to an end. Not because everything became perfect, but because I've reached a point where I can live with what was. Where my past is part of the landscape of my soul, not an abyss I constantly risk falling into. I destroyed my life, yes, but I also built a new one. And in this new life, there is room for both pain and joy, for love, and for mistakes, which I know will still happen. But now I also know that I will be accountable for them. That I won't run away. That I will stay. If you're reading this and you're in that place where I was 5 years ago, in the hell of shame, loss, and self-destruction, know this. That hell is not eternal. There is a way out. But it lies not through forgetting, but through acceptance. Through difficult, daily work on yourself. Through small acts of kindness you can perform, even if you think you're a monster. Through helping those who are weaker. Through professionalism in your work. Through honesty, first and foremost with yourself. You may not forgive yourself today. Or tomorrow. Or in a year. But one day, perhaps on some mountaintop or simply on a quiet evening, looking into the eyes of someone who loves you despite everything, you'll realize you've long been on the path of redemption. And that it's enough. Being on that path is enough. I am Jake Morgan. I cheated on my wife and lost everything. And then I slowly, piece by piece, put myself back together. And today, I am a man who can look at the past without fear, at the present with gratitude, and at the future with a quiet, cautious hope. Thanks for listening. It's been another 2 years since that hike in the mountains. I'm 37. If someone had told me 10 years ago what my life would be like at 37, I wouldn't have believed it. Not the nightmare part, nor the part that came after. I'm writing this epilogue not as a continuation of the confession, but as a period. A final look over my shoulder before finally turning to face my present. Eleanor and I never married. But a year ago, we bought a house. Not big, not in a prestigious area, but with a garden and a porch. A house for two. Lauren is in college out of state. Eli is a senior in high school, dreaming of Stanford. They call our house, base, a place to come back to for holidays. For me, that's the highest mark of trust. The house has an office for me and a bright studio room for Eleanor, where she now runs a private physical therapy practice. There's a corner with a dog bed, where Bruno once slept. Now, a new dog sometimes naps there, a rescued border collie named Huckleberry. He's smart and demanding, keeps me moving. Life goes on. At work, I've become what they call an expert. People come to me for advice. I get invited to speak at small conferences. I'm not a star, but a respected professional. Money is no longer an issue, but I don't spend it thoughtlessly. A portion still goes to shelters and charities helping people through difficult divorces. It's my quiet penance, my way of turning pain into something useful. Sometimes, very rarely, I get news from my past life. Tom writes sometimes, sends funny memes or talks about alumni meetings. He says Mike and Sarah are still happy. Their daughter, Emily, yes, they named her that. I didn't ask why, and Tom didn't elaborate, is already in school. They seem to have had a second child. I'm happy for them, like you're happy for the heroes of a favorite book you finished long ago. They're living their story, I'm living mine. Our plots no longer intersect, and that's right. My relationship with my parents has improved. My dad once, after a couple of glasses of wine at Christmas, clapped me on the shoulder and said, "You pulled through." Well done. I didn't need more from him. My mom adores Eleanor and grumbles that we never had a proper wedding. We smile and brush it off. The most important change is the silence in my head. The alarm bell of guilt that rang for years has been replaced by the steady, calm hum of life. Of course, the old demons still wake up sometimes. I see a couple arguing in a cafe and catch myself thinking, he's about to make a mistake. Or I hear a story about someone else's infidelity, and a cold lump tightens in my chest. But it's no longer my pain. It's an echo. And echoes, as we know, fade with time. I'm not a saint. I can still be irritable, stubborn, sometimes too absorbed in work. But now I notice it and can stop. I can tell Eleanor, sorry, I'm in a bad mood today, it's not because of you. I can put the laptop aside and go for a walk with the dog. Small victories over old demons. Recently, I finished therapy. Dr. Alina shook my hand and said, "You've come a long way, Jake. Now you are your own best therapist. Remember, falling is part of the journey. What matters is how you get up." I walked out of her office into a sunny day and realized I no longer felt like a patient. I felt like simply a person. With my own history, my own scars, my own joys. This story I posted here is my way of closing the door to that room of the past where I lived for so long. I took everything valuable from there. The lessons, the pain, the understanding. And now I'm letting the dust settle. If you've read this far, thank you. Perhaps you were looking for condemnation or, conversely, justification in my story. I offer neither. I'm only showing the topography of one personal hell and the trail that, in the end, led out of it. Everyone's trail will be their own. Infidelity isn't just an act. It's an earthquake that destroys the landscape of trust, love, and self-respect. After it, you can choose to live in the ruins, whimpering in pain. You can try to build a flimsy facade and pretend nothing happened. Or you can, clenching your teeth, start clearing the rubble, stone by stone, and build a new dwelling on the same spot, but accounting for the weakness of the ground. More modest but sturdy. And in its foundation will be the memory of the earthquake, so as never to forget the fragility of the world. My new house stands. There is love in it, respect, silence, and a dog that wags its tail when I come home from work. There is a woman in it who knows the whole truth and still chooses to share this space with me. There is me, a man who no longer runs from himself. I destroyed my life, yes, but I also built a new one. And in this new life, there is room for both pain and joy, for love, and for mistakes, which I know will still happen. But now I also know that I will be accountable for them. That I won't run away. That I will stay. Another 3 years passed. I turned 37. Life had settled into a rhythm, a predictability that I once feared as a harbinger of boredom but now cherished as a blessing. I was still at the same company, leading a small department. Marcus, my savior, had retired, but we still exchanged emails occasionally. Projects were challenging, but no longer an escape. They were something I took pride in. Eleanor and I didn't marry or fully move in together. She had her teenage kids who needed the stability of her home, and I had Bruno, who was aging and needed peace. But we spent 3 or 4 days a week together, sometimes at her place, sometimes at mine. It was a conscious choice, to preserve space but share a life. After the fiery inferno of my first marriage and the icy desert of loneliness, this warm, steady flame was exactly what I needed. Her kids, Lauren and Eli, almost adults now, called me by my name and sometimes asked for advice. It was enough, more than enough. Bruno died quietly in his sleep on his bed at my feet. It was sad, but not tragic. He had lived a long life for a dog his size, and his final years were filled with care. I scattered his ashes in the park where we used to walk. Eleanor was with me, holding my hand. The grief was pure, unburdened by guilt. I was able to say goodbye with dignity. But the biggest changes weren't in my personal life, they were inside me. Therapy with Dr. Alina became less intensive, shifting to a maintenance mode once a month. We worked a lot on separating the feeling of guilt from identity. "You are not the bastard who cheated," she would say. "You are a man who committed a bastardly act. The difference is huge. The first is a brand for life. The second is an action, followed by consequences and, importantly, work on change." I started keeping a journal. Not daily, but when waves of emotion hit. I described not only the bad but also moments of quiet joy. The taste of coffee Eleanor made, a problem solved at work, the grateful look of a new shelter puppy I was working with. I wrote letters I never sent. To Sarah, to Mike, to my parents. In them, I wasn't asking for forgiveness. I was trying to explain, to understand for myself the scale of the damage I'd caused and how I lived with it. It was a way of having a dialogue with the ghosts of the past, so they would stop being silent accusers. Once, while sorting through old boxes in the attic, I found our wedding album. I don't know how it ended up there. Sarah must have sent it with the rest of my things without looking. I sat on the floor and opened it. There we were, Sarah and I, young, radiant, full of hope. Our parents, friends, Mike, laughing, glass in hand. I waited for the pain, the longing, the self-loathing to wash over me. But something else came. A light, almost weightless sadness. Like for someone who had died long ago of natural causes. Those people in the photos, they are me and her, but we've become different people. Lived different lives. I closed the album, wrapped it in paper, and put it back in the box. I didn't throw it away. Just set it aside, like a historical artifact, evidence that that life existed. It wasn't false. It just ended. My mom, after several years of strained relations, started calling just to chat again. Asked about work, about Eleanor, whom she'd met once and, to my surprise, approved of, about my health. My dad still kept his distance, but on my birthday he sent a short text. "Happy birthday, son." For him, that was a lot. I learned to appreciate these small steps. But the most unexpected was a call from Tom, our mutual friend with Mike. We hadn't spoken since that day he called me after the scandal. "Jake, hi, it's Tom. Don't hang up, please." His voice sounded uncertain. I was sitting in my office at work, and the world swayed for a second. "Hi, Tom. What's up?" Nothing bad. Just, I was sitting here thinking. We all just kind of recoiled back then, 5 years ago. Mike was furious, Sarah was in shock, you disappeared. And we all, the whole gang, just took the side that was easier to take. The victim's side, and the friend who was defending that victim. I was silent, not knowing what to say. "I'm not justifying you," Tom added quickly. "You fucked up, big time. But, I haven't been sinless in my life either. Not as public, but..." And I thought, it's been ages. And that maybe you're still out there. And maybe we could, I don't know, have a coffee, like old acquaintances. No deep analysis. We met at a neutral cafe downtown. It was awkward for the first 10 minutes. Then we started talking about football, old college stupidities, work. Tom mentioned Mike and Sarah in passing, saying they were doing well, had a daughter, moved to the suburbs, bought a house. I nodded, feeling not pain but an echo of that same light sadness. I was happy for them. Sincerely. "They don't mention you," Tom said carefully. "It's like a closed topic. But, you know, a couple of months ago I was at their place for their little girl's birthday. Mike, after a few drinks, told me that if it weren't for all that, he'd never have been with Sarah. And he said it without anger. Just as a fact, a strange twist of fate. That touched a nerve. Not as hope for forgiveness, but as an acknowledgement of that complex, ugly, but real connection that forever bound the three of us. We were part of each other's stories, even if not the chapter any of us would have wanted to be. Don't tell them anything, I said to Tom as we parted. Just, if you get the chance, just be a good friend to them. They deserve that, Tom nodded. And you, take care of yourself, Jake. Glad you're okay. That conversation became another stone in the bridge I was slowly, stone by stone, building back to humanity. Not to that old life, but to the ability to look at the past without shame that makes you shut your eyes. With Eleanor, we talked about the future one evening. About what would happen when her kids went off to college. Do you ever want to get married again? She asked. Looking at the fire in the fireplace, I'd finally bought a bigger apartment with a fireplace. I thought about it. I don't know. Marriage for me, it's associated with a promise I once smashed so hard it echoed for miles. I'm scared to make promises like that. Who's talking about promises? She smiled. Maybe just partnership. About being there. In sickness and in health, as they say. Just without the pomp. Without expecting perfection. And you? I asked. I believe in real actions more than in vows. You've been proving with your actions for 5 years what kind of man you are. To me, that carries more weight than any vow at an altar. We didn't get engaged, but that evening I realized that if I ever decided to do it again, it would only be with her. Because with her, I could be myself, broken but mending, guilty but accountable. She saw the entire map of my soul, with all its dark forests and scorched fields, and still chose to walk it with me. Last summer, I went on a solo hiking trip in the Cascade Mountains. I'd always loved the mountains, but after the divorce I stopped going. Too many memories of hikes with Sarah and Mike. But now I wanted to. Not to overcome, but just to be alone with nature, with myself. It didn't come as a bright flash of insight, but as a quiet, deep understanding, diffused in the air. The understanding that the guy who cheated on his wife, that's me. But that's not all of me. It was a version of me, lost, frightened, weak. I can't tear that page out of the book of my life. But I can acknowledge that it's there. And I can acknowledge that the next chapters, the ones where I cared for Bruno, where I took on that difficult project, where I'm sitting here on this summit, where I love Eleanor and her kids, where I help at the shelter, they were also written by me. And they carry no less weight. I am not a good man who made one bad mistake. And I am not a bad man who sometimes does good deeds. I am a complex, contradictory person, capable of both treachery and mercy. And I choose where to direct my strength now. I cried. For the first time, not from despair or self-pity, but from relief. The tears were salty and cold from the wind. I cried for everything. For the pain I caused, for the love I lost, for the friendship I betrayed, for the long years of atonement, for the quiet happiness I found later. I cried as one cries at a grave, with sadness, but also with the acknowledgement that life goes on. When the tears stopped, I felt an incredible lightness. Not as if the burden had disappeared. As if I had finally straightened up under its weight and learned to carry it without bending. I came down from the mountain the next day. Returned to the city, to Eleanor, to work, to life. But something had changed. Permanently. I no longer looked over my shoulder, expecting to see ghosts. They were with me, in my memory, but they no longer had power over me. The story I started telling here on Reddit is coming to an end. Not because everything became perfect. But because I've reached a point where I can live with what was. Where my past is part of the landscape of my soul, not an abyss I constantly risk falling into. I destroyed my life, yes, but I also built a new one. And in this new life, there is room for both pain and joy, for love, and for mistakes, which I know will still happen. But now I also know that I will be accountable for them. That I won't run away. That I will stay. If you're reading this and you're in that place where I was 5 years ago, in the hell of shame, loss, and self-destruction, know this. That hell is not eternal. There is a way out. But it lies not through forgetting, but through acceptance. Through difficult, daily work on yourself. Through small acts of kindness you can perform, even if you think you're a monster. Through helping those who are weaker. Through professionalism in your work. Through honesty, first and foremost with yourself. You may not forgive yourself today. Or tomorrow. Or in a year. But one day, perhaps on some mountaintop or simply on a quiet evening, looking into the eyes of someone who loves you despite everything, you'll realize you've long been on the path of redemption. And that it's enough. Being on that path is enough. I am Jake Morgan. I cheated on my wife and lost everything. And then I slowly, piece by piece, put myself back together. And today, I am a man who can look at the past without fear, at the present with gratitude, and at the future with a quiet, cautious hope. Thanks for listening. It has been another 2 years since that mountain hike. I am 39 now. If someone had told me a decade ago what my life would look like at 39, I would never have believed them. Not the horrific part, nor the part that came after. I am writing this epilogue not as a continuation of the confession, but as a full stop. A final glance over my shoulder before I turn to face my present for good. Eleanor and I did not get married in a traditional sense. But last year, on a quiet autumn day, we held a small ceremony in our garden. Just us, her kids, a few close friends, and a non-denominational officiant. We didn't exchange rings. We exchanged vows we had written ourselves, not promises of eternal perfection, but commitments to choose each other, every day, with all our flaws and histories. We promised to be a harbor for one another. Lauren was my best person, and Eli walked his mother down the aisle we'd made between the rose bushes. It wasn't a wedding from my youth. It was better. It was real. Our house is a home now, filled with the evidence of a shared life. Huckleberry's toys are scattered in the living room. Eleanor's art projects cover the dining table for weeks. My old, battered coding books share shelf space with her medical journals and the kids' college textbooks. There are photos on the walls, of us, of the kids, of Bruno, of hikes and silly moments. There is one photo, small and tucked on a bookshelf in my office, of Sarah, Mike, and me at our college graduation. Arms slung over each other's shoulders, squinting in the sun. I don't hide it. It's a piece of my history. It doesn't hurt anymore. It just was. Professionally, I've found a niche I love, mentoring young developers. I teach them not just about clean code, but about integrity, about the weight of their choices, about building a career that doesn't consume your soul. Some of them probably hear rumors about my past. I don't address it unless they ask. And if they do, I tell them the truth. That I made a choice that cost me everything I held dear, and that the road back is longer and harder than the road down. They listen. I think it does them more good than any lecture on ethics. Mike and Sarah had their second child, a boy. I know this from a holiday card Tom forwarded me by accident, with a note saying, "Meant to send you my new address, grabbed the wrong envelope." The card was a generic winter scene. The message inside was in Sarah's neat handwriting. "Wishing you peace and joy this season." The Carters. No first names. Just, the Carters. It was both a door gently closed and a kindness I didn't deserve. I didn't write back. I donated to a children's charity in their town in their family's name. It felt like the only right response. My father passed away last year. I was with him at the end. We hadn't said much over the years, but in his final days, the barriers fell. He held my hand, his grip surprisingly strong, and said, "I was too hard on you. I was scared you'd become like me, stuck, resentful. But you got unstuck. Even if it was a hell of a way to do it." It was the closest he ever came to an apology and an affirmation. I told him I loved him. He nodded, closed his eyes, and that was that. His death was a deep sorrow, but not a complicated one. We had made our peace. The ghost of the man I was, the cheating husband, the betraying friend, that ghost finally faded. Not because I forgot him, but because I integrated him. He is not a separate entity to be hated. He is me on a certain day, in a certain series of terrible choices. I carry him with me, not as a shadow, but as a cautionary tale etched into my bones. He ensures I am never careless with love, never cavalier with trust. Eleanor and I talk about growing old. We joke about moving to a cottage by a lake, about getting more dogs, about being the eccentric old couple on the block. It's a future I can picture without flinching. A future built on ashes, yes, but the grass growing over those ashes is green and strong. I sometimes wonder what my life would have been like if I had never stepped onto that balcony with Emily. I would likely still be with Sarah. We might have had children. We might have been happy in that other, simpler timeline. But I also know that man, the one who didn't fall, would have carried his quiet desperation, his unvoiced fears, his latent capacity for betrayal within him forever, like a sleeping virus. The explosion forced the sickness out into the open, where it could be dealt with, however brutally. In that other life, I might have been a good husband, but a lesser man. A man who never had to stare into the abyss of his own character and decide who he wanted to be on the other side of it. I am not glad for what I did. The cost was cataclysmic, and innocent people, Sarah most of all, paid the heaviest price. I would undo it in a heartbeat if I could. But I cannot. And so, I have had to find meaning not in the act, but in the response. My life now is that response. This Reddit post, this long confession, was part of that response. It was my way of howling my pain into the void, of holding myself accountable in the most public way I could conceive from the isolation of my motel room. To everyone who read, who commented, who sent messages of both condemnation and solidarity, thank you. You were witnesses. You formed a makeshift jury for a trial I needed to hold. You helped me believe my story mattered, that the lessons within it might ripple out and maybe, just maybe, stop someone else from making the same cataclysmic mistake. So here is the final lesson, carved from the wreckage. You are not your worst mistake. But you are responsible for it. The road to redemption is not a path back to who you were. That person is gone. It is the path forward to who you must become, someone humbler, kinder, more conscious of the fragility of hearts, including your own. It is built not on grand gestures, but on small, daily choices. Choose honesty, especially when it's hard. Choose kindness, especially to yourself. Choose presence, especially when you want to run. Choose to make your corner of the world a little softer for someone else's pain. The guilt may never fully leave. Let it become a guide, not a warden. The memory of the pain you caused will always ache in certain weather. Let it remind you of the profound privilege it is to be trusted with someone's heart. My name is Jake Morgan. I was an unfaithful husband and a disloyal friend. I am a devoted partner, a grateful stepfather, a mentor, a dog lover, and a man who is, finally, at peace with his own reflection. The story is over. The life continues. And for that, I am quietly, undeniably thankful. Farewell.